Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you guys about a subject that I just recently wrote on, and that is the phenomena of Iranian nationalism. This is not something that is talked about a whole lot. I've been interested in this subject for a couple of years now. When we talk about nationalism or ultranationalism or populism, right wing politics, etc., we tend to focus on the Western world. We tend to focus on countries that we consider to be developed. So we'll focus on American nationalism or German nationalism, English nationalism, British nationalism, populism in the United States, specifically with people like Bernie Sanders and his whole movement. We'll talk about Japanese nationalism in the context of the immense popularity for the Social Democratic Party, or sorry, the Liberal Democratic Party in Japan. We'll talk about, generally speaking, we'll talk about developed countries, but we really don't focus so much on things like Iranian nationalism. A lot of people just look at the Middle East, and by a lot of people, I'm talking about the general populace. They'll look at the Middle East and they'll just say, "Oh, Iran, yeah, that's a Muslim country." And then they'll see a video of a bunch of Iranians cutting themselves in the middle of the street, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, this is Islam." And it's like, no, not really. This is a part of Shia Islam, which is, albeit it's a huge sect of Islam, but nonetheless, it's still a minority. Regardless of that, it is the largest minority within Islam. But it's not Islam. You can't just generalize it in that way. Um, and they'll just say, well, this is Islam, but they'll never actually look at the history of this ritual. It's called the Shura. For those of you who are interested, I did a video about this not too long ago. Um, they won't really look into the roots of Ashura. They won't look into the fact that, well, Iranians before Islam were cutting themselves for the dead, and now they're still cutting themselves for the dead. The only difference is that now they're cutting themselves for Ali and his two sons, Hassan and Hussein, but they're still cutting themselves for the dead. And they'll just say, well, yeah, this is Islam. These are just Muslims, blah, 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 blah. But they don't really factor in another influence within the ideology that is prevalent in Iran, and that is nationalism. Yes, Iran is a Muslim country, but is it Muslim in the sense of Wahhabism? Is it Muslim in the sense that they're like the Saudis, or they're like the people in the United Arab Emirates, or they're like the people in Egypt? No, it's not. They're very different, actually. Iranians, and I, for those of you who want to learn more about this, I just got done posting up an article on this subject, specifically on Iranian nationalism. It took me about 4 days. Well, it took us because my dad helped me write it, but it took us about 4 or 5 days to finish it. Um, and for those of you who follow me on Facebook or shootbot.com, you'll probably notice that I haven't really been posting a whole lot, and the reason is because I've been writing this article. Years ago, I used to do a whole lot of really short posts, but I don't really want to do that anymore. I just want to focus on writing really in-depth pieces, and so I spent this week just working on this article. And I did a lot of research. I spent a lot of time reading on the subject of Iranian nationalism. Um, there's not a whole lot of information on it because everyone wants to talk about Western nationalism, or when they talk about nationalism in the Eastern world, they'll focus on like Japan or India with the BJP and Narendra Modi. But they don't really talk about Iranian nationalism. And I think a lot of this has to do with the perception that it's just another Muslim country. So, yeah, it's Islam. But there are people who have written on the subject, albeit there's not a whole lot of them. But still, regardless of that, there is information out there. There is probably a lot more information in the Iranian language, the Farsi language, than there is in the English language. Nevertheless, there is some information on it that you can read. Um, Within Iran, there is a huge focus on the mystical side of Islam. And the Iranians like to boast themselves they like to boast themselves as this people that are very, very intelligent. And so they have a special form of Islam, which they perceive to be the pure form of Islam, which is purged of any sort of Arabian influence. Although within the Iranian language, there's a lot of Arabic words. But they believe they what they'll argue is that they have purged themselves of the ugliness of Arabian tribalism and chauvinism. Um, for example, there are Persian poems from a long time ago that will say things like, "We are the Iranian people. We're super proud of our ancestry. We're very proud of our roots. We're very proud of our heritage, and we are unlike the Arabs, who are savage." And to this day, you can look into Iranian media, and you will find things about how the Arabs were a brutal people and cruel people, and there is a lot of truth to that. Now, I can't really blame the Iranians for uh, having this sort of grudge with the Arabs. I can't really blame them, given the history that exists between these two people. Um, the the Persians and the Arabs, they had some pretty vicious moments long ago. So, for example, the Arabs conquered Iran when Islam was a brand new religion, and the Persians, to their credit, they put up a really, really strong resistance. But as big of a fight as they tried to attempt, they lost. And when they lost, the Arabs butchered thousands and thousands of people. There is a battle that you can read about online. It's called the Battle of Ulais, Ullais. I'm pretty sure that's the spelling. And it's actually very interesting when the Persians resisted Arab advancement or uh, the Arab conquest. There were actually Arab Christians who lived within Persia who also joined the fight against the Muslim Arabs. So there was a Christian minority within Iran, within Persia, that also took part in this war to defend Iran. I found that to be very fascinating. And it gives you an idea more or less about Iran. There was a lot of persecution against Christians done by pagan Iranians, pagan Persians, but still, it gives you a better idea. I think it gives you more of a full picture. The fact that there were Christians living in Iran who did defend their country, and when the Persians lost, the warrior who fought under Muhammad, Khalid ibn Walid, he took the Christians and he took the Persians, and he brought them to this river, the Ulais River, and he butchered all of them. And they say that there was so much blood that the blood became a river unto itself. So of course you're going to have this immense animosity, and the fact that Iran is Muslim today because of the Arab conquest leaves the Iranians in a difficult situation where they have to reconcile the fact that they were brutalized by the Arabs and the fact that they are still observing the religion that the Arabs brought to them. So, in order to reconcile this reality, they have to distinguish themselves from the Arabs. They have to distinguish themselves from the Arab Muslims. They have to distinguish their Islam, Iranian Islam, from Arabian Islam, Wahhabism. So they will resist Arabization. And that is why when you go to Iran, you'll see that they are still they still observe pagan celebrations. For example, there is the most famous of these holidays is probably the holiday of Nowruz, which is the Persian New Year, and this is the celebration of nature. It's the celebration of life. It's the celebration of the spring harvest, the things that nature has given us. And this holiday goes back to pagan times, and the Persians still observe it. The Persians actually believe that the 12th Imam, their Messiah, is going to return or appear, because a lot of them believe that he's hiding in a well. They believe that he's going to appear during the day of Novruz. It's said with the W, so I think it's Novruz or Nowruz. I don't know. Correct me on that one. And there's also another holiday that a lot of Iranians observe. It's called Chahar Shanbe Suri, which is literally the celebration of fire. And this is something that goes all the way back to the days when Iranians literally worshipped fire. They worshipped fire. And you can read a lot of accounts from antiquity in which pagan Persians would try to compel Christians to worship fire, and the Christians would refuse to do so, and they would be killed. But to this day, the Iranians are still observing the celebration of fire and the celebration of the spring. And so this is really a way to distinguish themselves from the Arabs. And then another way that the Iranians distinguish themselves from the Arabs is their nationalism. Within the Iranian ideology or the paradigm of Iranian nationalism, there are two aspects of it. There is the Iraniyat, the ethno-linguistic aspect of their nationalism, and then of course there's also the Islamiyat, which is the Islamic aspect of it. And I don't need to go into heavy detail to explain to you what that is. It's the Islamic aspect of it. In this case, the Shia Islamic aspect to it. And so the Iranians have made a harmony or a synchronization between Shia Islam and Iranian ethnocentric nationalism. The Iranians also believe that what differentiates them from the Arabs is that the Iranians were an intelligent people, and that, now I'm not saying all Iranians believe this, but this is an existing ideology within Iran. They believe that the Iranians were an intelligent people, and they were intelligent enough to recognize the purity of Islam, as opposed to the Arabs, whose only reason for accepting the Islamic religion was that it came from an Arab prophet. So they believe that if Islam was not introduced by an Arab, the Arabs would have never accepted Islam because they are a cruel and savage people. This is the paradigm that is believed. On the other hand, the Iranians were intelligent enough to see the purity of Islam, regardless of the fact of it coming from an Arab. And so they were an intelligent people. They have these innate characteristics. And so in a way, it's like they're still subscribing to the universalist character of Islam by saying that they were intelligent enough to see a pure religion regardless of the ethnicity of the prophet. But at the same time, they are maintaining this ethnocentric ideology by stating that the reason why they were able to accept Islam was because they were innately intelligent. So it uplifts the Iranian race while at the same time preserving the universalist nature of Islam. So this is the balance that they're trying to preserve. They're trying to preserve the balance between being Muslim, but at the same time being an Iranian, a proud Iranian, an Iranian nationalist. There's even a quote, and I can read it to you guys. This is from a professor of philosophy within Iran. And he talks about this idea that Iranians inherit intelligent characteristics or very high characteristics. So it says here, this quote is from a guy, his name is Khusrov Paneh. It's all in the article. I'll post it in the link below so you guys can read it for yourselves. But it says here, this is what this guy says. Quote, but there's also people who have linked Iranian national identity to truths that go back more to human instincts. It seems to me that there is an innate feature and attribute in the human body that implies justice and truth-centeredness. So in other words, he's saying that there is a biological aspect or a biological underpinning as to why people are more moral. It's in the human body. And he says here, but the most important factor that made Iranians accept pure Islam and oppose Umayyad Islam, Arabian Islam, was their innate characteristics. Those characteristics of Iranians, as I said, go back to the natural characteristics of Iranians. So here we see really a eugenic belief that uplifts the Iranian race. And there is an Iranian song. It's called Sohe. I don't know what that word exactly means, but it's called Sohe, and it's an Iranian song. It's a heavily Shiite influence, but it talks about killing the Jews and the Arabs, and it describes the Arabs as essentially prostitutes to Israel, and how the Iranians are eventually going to kill all the Jews, and et cetera, et cetera. So here's a quote from the song. It says here, "We hear the shouts of the world-eating Jews from the throat of the Saudi king." Saudi Arabia is a prostitute to Israel. That's what this song is saying. And then it goes on to say, "For as long as the divine spirit is in the heart of this soil, Iran, our enemies will not be allowed to sleep a single restful night. Our missiles will drop in the heart of Tel Aviv." So in other words, he's saying, as long as the divine spirit is within this land, within this soil, we're going to kill the Jews. So it's a blood and soil ideology that's linked together through religion, or that's mixed in or amalgamated with religion. So he's saying here that Iran is a divine country. The soil is possessed with the divine spirit. It's possessed with the spirit of God. And as long as the spirit of God is within this land, we're going to kill the Jews. We're going to wipe out the Jews. And so here in Iran, you have this idea of Iranians being a very intelligent people, inherently intelligent, and that's the reason why they have the superior form of Islam. And then at the same time, there's this idea that Iran is a sacred land, and as long as it's sacred, we're going to kill the Jews. Sounds kind of like Nazism. It's a few steps away from just German Nazism. And that leads me to another subject, Aryanism. Aryanism has become very popular in Iran. I don't like quoting Nazis, but in this case, I'm going to, because it does reveal a reality. There is an Iranian race realist, I guess you could call him. His name is Jason Jordanjani, and he's an Iranian American who he's allies with people like Richard Spencer and the rest of that whole alt-right circle. Very intelligent guy, very educated, likes to talk a lot about Iran and Zoroastrianism and how Iran has been so influential to Western civilization, etc., etc. But he says that in Iran today, there has been a renaissance towards nationalism, and there's been a lot of resistance amongst the young people against Islamism, and a rising favor towards things like Zoroastrianism and things like Iranian nationalism. And I don't think he has said that Iranians are just going to leave Islam, but I think what he has been saying is that Iranians are going to have more of a syncretist ideology between mystical Islam, more of a Sufi Islam, with nationalism. And I think that there is truth to what this guy says. Because there is within Iran a strong presence of the Aryanist ideology, or this idea that Iranians are Aryans and therefore they are superior. This is why a lot of Iranians like to talk about Adolf Hitler, and they like to talk about how great Germany is, because they see themselves as related to the Germans. In fact, in Nazi Germany, the Germans knew this. There was a heavy German Nazi presence within Iran. There were many Iranian collaborators who worked with the Nazis. And the Germans knew that this was a prevalent belief amongst the Iranians, and they took advantage of this. They capitalized upon it, and the Germans went right with it. They went right along with it, and they said, yeah, Iranians are Aryans, and we're related, and we're the same people, and so we have to work together to fight against the Soviet Union and the Americans and the British. Now, it's interesting because within Germany, there was a belief that Iranians were inferior and they were essentially mongrels. And there was a lot of cases in Nazi Germany of German citizens literally attacking Iranian people, Iranians living in Germany. And so the Iranian embassy got really upset. The Iranian government got upset, and they told the Germans, hey, you need to make us equals to you, or else this is going to continue happening. So the Germans said, okay, fine. Iranians are Aryans. And then, that put an end to for the most part, to the discrimination. But the Nazis, they completely capitalized on this idea, and they said, yeah, we're the same people. This idea still continues on in Iran today. Mohammad Reza Shah, when he was the Shah of Iran, He gave himself the title of King of the Aryans. He even stated that Iranians are basically Europeans, and that it was by a complete accident that Iran was in the Middle East instead of Europe. And there was also a Nazi. There was an Iranian collaborator with the Nazis, and he talked about how, I'll try to find the his name, Abul Qassem Kashani. This guy in the 1950s, he was really upset that the Nazis had lost the war, and he stated that he wanted Germany to revive itself as a power within Europe again. Um, Also, Mohammad Reza Shah in the 1970s also stated that he wanted to see a revived German power. What's interesting is that this Iranian dream of a revived German power is gradually manifesting itself. It's gradually incarnating into reality, because we're seeing Germany become more and more of um, a superpower, or really a regional power within Europe that's independent from American control. And this is what is gradually taking place. We've been witnessing this probably since, well, I mean, if you think about it, we've been seeing this at an incremental state, um, going all the way back to the 1990s, when Germany backed the Albanians against the Serbs and essentially formed the Kosovo Liberation Army, giving weapons and training to a bunch of literal Albanian Nazis whose grandfathers were within the SS. What's very interesting is that this rise of Germany has been happening in conjunction with the rise of Iran. Uh, the United States had the Iran deal, and it was through the Iran deal that Iran's nuclear production was kept in check. The United States essentially canceled the Iran deal, and Iran said, okay, why should we listen to any of the rules? We're just going to do what we want. And now Iran has already exceeded its nuclear production, and it's gone completely against the Iran deal, and the Iran deal has been pretty much thrown out the window. The Germans, I think, took this as they took this as an opportunity to tell the Americans that we're not really wanting to listen to you guys anymore. And it came to the point where Jean-Claude Juncker, who at that time was the president of the EU Commission, said himself back in 2018, very recently, that it is time for us, Europe, headed by Germany, to replace the United States, basically saying that we need to eclipse American power in Europe and make Europe into a world power. They don't want to be under American control. And Jean-Claude Juncker said this in the context of America leaving the Iran deal, basically saying America leaving the Iran deal has demonstrated that America does not care about security, and now we are going to replace the United. We're going to replace the United States. That's what we want to do. And Germany still wants to continue doing business with Iran. And the Americans say, no, you can't do that. We're going to put pressure on you. We're going to put sanctions on European companies that do this. And the Europeans are saying, well, we don't want to be under the control of the Americans. We don't want to be subservient to the American Empire. So it's kind of like what happened under the Roman Empire. The Germans revolted against the Romans. Today, the Germans are revolting against the Roman Empire of our time, and that is America. And so the German revolution, so to speak, against America is to some extent sparked by Germany's desire to preserve economic ties with Iran. It's very interesting that the country that was the closest to exterminating the nation of Israel, Germany, insist on still having ties with a country that wants to destroy Israel. I just find that I find that interesting. It really goes to show you that history really does rhyme. Anyway, those are my thoughts for today. Read the article. The link is below. We just got it out today. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.